How do we keep students engaged? It's tricky because every student is different. Different backgrounds, different experiences, and different levels of motivation. Traditional teaching methods can leave them feeling confused, intimidated, left out, unheard, alone, discouraged. Top Hat's dynamic courseware helps you personalize your teaching to resonate with all students. In your lectures, in your assignments, and even in your textbooks. You can create learning moments that matter to your students. With 14 question types, you can drive real-time understanding, encourage active participation, and give every student a voice. The more your students engage with Top Hat, the more insights you get into their performance, giving you more opportunities to adapt your course as the semester unfolds. This helps students build confidence and drive better comprehension. How do we keep students engaged? The answer is right in front of you. Top Hat. Make every mind wonder.
Welcome back, everyone. And if you're just joining us now, we are glad to have you with us. I'm Eric Gardner, Director of Educational Programming here at Top Hat, and we are officially in the home stretch of Top Hat Engage Virtual Edition. In this final session, we are turning our attention to something deceptively simple but incredibly powerful: how a steady stream of small, timely feedback moments can create big shifts in how students learn, in how we teach, and in the shared learning experience that you shape together. So speaking of which, one of the ways we're going to capture these all-important insights is by using Top Hat, and we're going to be using Top Hat throughout our presentation once again. So if you're just joining us now, you can scan that QR code to access Top Hat guest mode. This is a really cool new feature because you can use this for one-off presentations. Maybe it's a faculty workshop or a conference presentation. So there's actually no need for the folks on the other end to actually download the Top Hat app. It's also great if you want to just test out your content before presenting that in front of students. So a lot of interesting use cases, and we're going to use that today as well. Or if you don't have a mobile phone and you're using a laptop or a desktop computer, you can just enter in that URL you see on the screen there, and you'll be able to access a web browser-based version of Top Hat. So we'll use our Q&A feature. Hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. We've struggled a little bit with the last couple of sessions, a lot of content to get through. But if you do have questions, post those in the Q&A. And if you've got resources, inspiration, ideas, strategies, practices that you use in your course, please feel free to share those in the Zoom chat. It's a great part of these events is having faculty and fellow educators chiming in on what's working, what's not working, build that community as we go. And we are recording all of our sessions today, and we're going to be sending those out. You will also get a copy of the slide presentations as well to refer back to. We're communicating a fair bit of information in these sessions. And sometimes it's hard to keep up with note taking, so you will have those in hand within the next day or so. So we'll get that to you so you can just sit back, engage, enjoy the presentation. And hopefully you have been able to log in, because I think we're going to be launching our first question in just a few moments. But I think it's safe to say that students want to succeed, but too often they're unsure of how they're actually doing, what they've truly grasped, or where they may need to actually focus more time and attention. And at the same time, many faculty are actually left guessing. Are students actually keeping up? Are we reaching them? Are we making the impact that we hope to make? So feedback loops, those early, frequent, low stakes assessments, are one of the most powerful tools we have to create a more responsive and effective learning environment. And when we tap into those small signals that students send through quick polls, discussion responses, maybe micro assessments, we unlock a continuous stream of insight, not just into what students know, but into the impact of our own teaching practice. This is also the foundation of something that is vital to student success, and I would posit well-being, because these feedback loops allow us to demonstrate caring, to provide support in the moment, and to foster a sense of connection between ourselves and our students. And to explore how we can bring this to life, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker for today, Sumi Voora is a professional services manager here at Top Hat. She's going to be a bit embarrassed by this, but she was voted the top hatter in the company. So that's our most prestigious employee award, and for good reason. She's worked with dozens of institutions and many more faculty, providing workshops as well as one-to-one guidance on course design, and of course using Top Hat to support active learning, student engagement, to improve learning outcomes, and make the whole experience more enjoyable for both faculty and students alike. So Sumi, it is lovely to have you with us. And there you are. Nice to see you. You have the virtual floor, Sumi.
Thank you so much, Eric, for that very kind introduction. So let's get right into it. I want to ask you to think about your classroom for a moment. The faces you see each week, and behind each of those faces is a story. First generation college students, career changers, students who are juggling jobs, family responsibilities, and sometimes even quiet self-doubt. Today's classrooms are more diverse than ever in background, in ability, in motivation. And for many students, stepping into higher education is a seismic shift. It's not just the content that's harder. It's the rules for success where students suddenly feel invisible. I want you to pause on that. How many students do you think have reached college by being naturally smart? And then when the content deepens, when the grind kicks in, they hit a wall. And instead of thinking, I need a new strategy, they think maybe I'm not cut out for this. This fixed mindset isn't just an abstract challenge. It shows up in deferrals, withdrawals, missed opportunities, and widening equity gaps. One major factor, students often don't get feedback early enough or often enough to understand how to improve before the stakes are high. And yet, we know that you're not here today because you want to check a box. Faculty are stretched thin, yes, but every single one of you is here today because of how much you care. You want your students to find that spark, and you want learning to feel meaningful and not mechanical. So the question becomes, how can we create learning environments where feedback doesn't just evaluate, it illuminates, where students feel seen, guided, and equipped to grow, even in those large, complex courses? And that is what we're here to explore today. We'll look at the power timely, actionable feedback plays in helping students succeed, and the practical, scalable strategies you can use in your teaching to close that feedback loop without burning out. Let's get into it. So before we really dive into our discussion today, I want to get started with a quick poll to capture your thoughts around feedback. Tell me a little bit about when you find out your students are struggling.
Yeah, I'm curious to see about this because I know we've got a lot of very enlightened educators who attend these calls, and just to see if that's based on attendance, they're just finding out later. Is it when you do those initial polls and quick checks after that first major assessment, that might be a little too late in some cases, but
Yeah, it looks like we have quite a few coming in here. Perfect. And I see quite a few coming through the chat as well. We'll maybe give that a couple more seconds, Danielle, and if you don't mind moving us to the responses. Interesting. So we have some pretty mixed results here, but I'm seeing a common trend where most folks are seeing that first level of major insight in terms of where students are struggling after the first exam or the first major assessment in the course. So before we dive into what that means in the world of higher education a little bit more, I want to look at an example in the business world. The business world has embraced the notion of learning through feedback loops for decades. It's this foundation of Kaizen, or the philosophy of continuous improvement, which was first implemented by Toyota, that has set a standard for global manufacturing. Imagine you're running a high-tech car factory like Toyota. Every part, every process, and every worker is part of a errors are identified and fixed in real time to ensure excellence. And high quality learning, like the business world, thrives on continuous feedback. But what challenges do we encounter when it comes to developing this feedback loop in higher education? So let's take a look at the research. The research indicates that most instructors don't have access or use sentiment or engagement data to get a read on students. And instead, they're required to rely on personal observations, which can be highly subjective and even introduce bias around student ability and aptitude. And I think we saw from, everybody who participated in the poll earlier today that the results we saw are consistent with this research. We're not getting the insight we need until perhaps after that first major assessment in the course. And from this Titan Partners report, we can see that the majority of instructors have to rely on those observations to get a read. Without incorporating some sort of technology that allows them to measure reliable sentiment data, instructors risk missing early warning signs or misinterpreting student needs. So to develop a continuous feedback loop, you must first ensure that you have the necessary insights to support student needs. So let's come back to our polls here, and let's think a little bit about how we go to capture that insight. Please take a moment to respond to the poll and let us know, how frequently are you including assessments to help gauge progress? And I think some of you had mentioned in the chat previously that you start early, but let's take a look at how you do things here.
And I think these are like knowledge checks, like light, low stakes assessments, just sort of quick getting the pulse, sometimes, just a few questions at the top of the class or midway through the class or even at the end of the class. We do have some folks chiming in on the chat, Sumi, so you'll have to do some quick mental math to kind of add that into the.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm skimming through, doing some multitasking here. I know Brad mentioned that earlier, that perhaps that's not the best way, but in this case, it'll just have to do. Perfect. So I'm seeing a lot of variance here from every class to even every few weeks. But what's really great is the level of engagement. Perhaps we can take a quick look at these responses, and I want to ask you to keep thinking about how you approach the frequent assessment in your class as we think about this next question. But I'm happy to see that for most folks, there's some sort of check-in on a regular basis, even as often as every single class. But let's take a look at our next question. So I want to shift gears slightly. So we've talked about how frequently you gauge students' understanding of the material, and I want to think about a different way of framing the conversation. How confident are you that students know what to do with the insights that are provided from those weekly check-ins? And I'm going to ask this question in kind of a unique way here. So when it comes to what you hope students associate with the feedback provided by you, what are the key words that come to mind? And if you could try, I know it might be challenging to limit your response to one or two keywords.
Because I think the plan here is to create a word cloud. Do I have that right?
That is the plan. Yeah, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I'm already seeing some things in the chat. We want the feedback to be positive, helpful. Useful is coming up quite a bit.
Yeah, actionable.
Actionable. Encouraging.
That's really nice to see.
That's really lovely, yeah. Specific, engaging. So I'm seeing a lot of common themes here. We'll give this a couple more seconds, but I'm seeing a lot of, we want them to be able to action or, actually apply the feedback that is provided to them. Maybe we'll give this just a few more.
I have a picture in my mind of what the word cloud is going to look like based on the chat. We'll see if that.
I think, yeah, the chat is a good indicator of our responses here. Danielle, maybe let's flip to the responses. And let's go ahead and generate that word cloud.
Oh, look at that.
No surprise there. So it seems like the chat was a pretty effective spoiler, but the ones that are standing out to me are constructive, helpful, actionable, and encouraging. We've determined that receiving feedback is important. And also as a group today, we've determined that we want students to be able to action the feedback provided to them. But what's getting in the way of that? So let's go ahead and take a look at our next slide here. One of the main challenges when it comes to applying feedback for students is not the lack of feedback, but simply not knowing how or not knowing what to do. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about an achievement gap that we tend to see in higher education. Economically disadvantaged students or those from underrepresented communities often don't have access to mentors or tutors who model metacognitive thinking skills. And they are disadvantaged when it comes to critically thinking about how learning occurs. Dr. McGuire, Director Emerita of the Center for Academic Success at Louisiana State University, and author of Teach Students How to Learn, coins this term as the metacognitive equity gap. Dr. McGuire believes that an achievement gap, and this gap specifically, has less to do with the varying levels of students, but instead is about students who are doing well, developing the necessary metacognitive skills. And instead, she encourages educators to shift their focus in bridging this gap in metacognitive equity by exposing students to processes and activities that help them plan, monitor, and assess their own learning. Another key concept here is the concept of learned helplessness, originally coined by Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer. This refers to the idea that based on previous experience, a student might feel that no amount of effort will bring success. This often interferes with their willingness or motivation to even attempt a new task. To give you an example, how many students come into higher education with the mindset that they're just not good at math? Myself included, probably because they didn't do so well on a prior assessment or someone told them that they weren't good at math back in the day. Let's take a look at some more research on this. I want to highlight a study from 2014 conducted by Stanford University, where instructors gave students the opportunity to revise an essay they'd written. One group received general comments while the second group was told, I'm giving you this feedback because I have very high expectations of you, and I know you can reach them. 40% of those who'd received the generic feedback chose to revise their papers, while almost 80% of the students in the WISE feedback group did the same. What's more is the second group made more than twice as many corrections. So double the amount of students chose to revise their papers, and even more so, put more effort into adapting their approach. So what this tells us is timely, constructive, and motivating feedback clearly makes a difference. I myself got to experience this firsthand. I started my post-secondary education with the hopes of becoming a doctor and very quickly hit a wall and believed I'm not cut out for this. Does that sound familiar? One instructor told me not everyone should be doctors. And although I believe they did have the best of intentions and were helping me redirect, the feedback did not help me understand where my gaps were. It wasn't actionable, it wasn't specific, and it certainly wasn't helpful or motivating me. On the other hand, another instructor encouraged me to think about how I learn and helped me realize I was performing significantly better on essays and group work rather than multiple choice exams. With their support, I was actually able to switch to a major that better aligned with my strengths and interests, and most importantly, develop the metacognitive skills that extend well beyond the classroom. Students get cues in so many different ways, from their parents, friends, even past experience or educators, and these small comments that tell them they can't achieve something. Keeping all of these experiences in mind, it's even more paramount to create a feedback loop and help students understand where their understanding lies. So, at the center of all of this is effective feedback. None of these strategies matter unless students can see how they're performing and how they can improve. And you caught on to this right at the beginning of our session today. Learning to play an instrument is easy by comparison in terms of what we're talking about today, because you know almost instantly when something sounds right or maybe it doesn't. Improving our teaching practice is a little more challenging than that. But we have a lot of opportunity to create a regular cadence of insights from our teaching practice that students can action successfully. So let's look at some of those strategies. While there's a lot of different ways in which you can approach this, I've summarized 5 strategies to help you ensure that students are able to leverage and apply the feedback you provide. Number 1, close the feedback loop by providing clear next steps. Feedback isn't impactful unless it points to somewhere. And a lot of you caught on to this. It needs to be specific and it needs to identify what those next steps are. We always want to consider pairing feedback with a suggestion for example. For example, if you scored X or low on the first assignment, here's where you can focus to improve. Another way is to use self-reflection to help students become feedback literate. So how do they go about processing the direction they're receiving? What are reflective questions we can include, such as, what did you do to prepare for this assessment? What questions or concepts felt the hardest? What is one thing you plan on doing differently next time? By identifying specific areas of improvement, you'll encourage metacognitive thinking and help students learn how to adapt their approach to learning. Number 3, and a particularly powerful strategy, is reframe feedback as an opportunity to normalize making mistakes. This is an important opportunity to remind students that assessments are not tools nor judgments. Making mistakes allows them to see where their learning lies, what gaps in understanding they have, what misconceptions they have. It's an important reminder that feedback is for them, not about them. Number 4, the power of including scaffolds and structures wherever you can. This is a fantastic way to provide guidance while not relying on the instructor to personalize the experience for every single student. We recognize that your time is stretched thin, and this is an excellent way to help meet students where they are. You can consider adding support guidelines after key assessments that include relevant explanations for questions, follow-up resources, and even short video walkthroughs. Finally, remember that feedback doesn't always have to come from you, and it's an excellent opportunity to build community amongst the learners in your classroom. This is an opportunity to lean into peer review or peer coaching moments where students can compare responses, practice explaining concepts, or even coach each other on low-stakes exercises through discussions in class or even forums outside of the classroom. These are just a few strategies that are going to help you ensure feedback is leveraged effectively. And I see a lot of, further specific examples and knowledge sharing coming through in the chat as well that captures a lot of these core principles. So thank you for that. Next, let's shift gears slightly and look at some educators who put these strategies into practice on a daily basis. First, let's look at some ways that we can create an environment that cultivates feedback. So I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Whitney Civil Sawyer from Louisiana Tech University, who strongly believes that creating opportunities for feedback should be intentional and ongoing. In her asynchronous course, she intentionally incorporates anonymous discussion so students can immediately put down their thoughts, questions, and feedback. If we could take a look at an example on the next slide here. Perfect, thank you. These insights from the discussions help inform her instructional practices, particularly in an environment where she doesn't have the opportunity to liaise with students directly, and there is no face-to-face interaction. This is important because it helps her implement the feedback in a timely manner. And it also helps her build community by helping students realize the questions they have are also questions other students in the course have. Dr. Sybil Sawyer uses this at a course level to help inform her material week to week and iterate semester over semester. But another fantastic example of cultivating an environment for feedback is Dr. Damien Hummel. And if you joined earlier today, you might remember the example of back channels. So Dr. Hummel at Oregon State uses opportunities or creates opportunities for student feedback in a synchronous lecture environment using back channels. And these back channels give students the opportunity to have their own conversations, share questions and comments. And yes, that includes memes and jokes and other things. But in our experience, this is a strategy that allows students to shape the culture of the classroom. And far from being a distraction, effective back channeling empowers students to take control of their own learning. It might seem counterintuitive, but a rich back channel can make individuals more inclined to speak up, especially for those where English might not be their first language, or perhaps they're a little bit more introverted and reluctant to raise a hand in class. The trick is to give students license to interrupt when an important question or comment arises, or assign specific individuals to monitor the discussion and check in periodically. The accountability helps students become active participants in how they learn. Back channels serve another important function. They shine a light on assumptions and misconceptions. Are students struggling in areas we didn't really anticipate? Are there memes or analogies students are using that are more effective in getting across the things we think are important? And in this way, back channels serve as an incredible formative assessment technique for instructors to identify ways to improve the delivery and impact of their teaching. So we've talked a little bit about cultivating that feedback, but what do we do with the insights when we receive them? Let's look at the example from Andrea Hendricks from Georgia State University Perimeter College, who's a longtime Top Hat user and has spoken on past events on teaching with insight. A core component of Andrea's approach to teaching involves ascertaining what students know, what they don't know, and what they think they know, but don't really understand or fully understand. Using that information, she helps students establish a solid framework of understanding that can better support new knowledge. So let's take a look at how she breaks up class time. If you're hearing what we're discussing today and thinking, this all sounds great, but what's an effective framework for how I can incorporate this as part of my lectures? This is an excellent example of how you can break up core class time and core material around specific learning objectives. So what Andrea does here is incorporates a low stakes learning activity after every major objective for the course. So students have an opportunity to reinforce understanding in real time. Frequent assessments are a cornerstone of her teaching practice and are essential opportunities for students to learn, practice, learn again, and repeat until the important material is something that they can retain well beyond the classroom. Very similarly, Dr. Allison Wiedemeyer from University of Louisiana Monroe is a firm believer in allowing students to make mistakes and learn from them. We see a lot of common themes here. Allison intentionally includes common misconceptions in her answer choices to help guide students through a discussion, perhaps even a think, pair, share. If we look at the next slide, she uses the insights from a word cloud, as we've done today, as a discussion jumping off point. What are the things that are the largest words? Why are they important? How do they relate to other key concepts that we're discussing today? She even takes pictures of word clouds during her in-class sessions and uses them as vocabulary review to help students identify key terms outside of class time when they access the material independently. I want to explore a little bit about what she means by helping students make mistakes. This is an example of the multiple choice question she uses. And you can see from the first screenshot that the responses in the histogram are pretty level. By including common misconceptions in her response options, she's able to give students immediate feedback to help them not understand just the what, but why they were inclined to select a specific answer. She then has students turn around and defend their choice to their peers and gives them an opportunity to re-answer the same question, which further solidifies what's being taught. And you can see the immediate shift in understanding with this results in the second image below. So, frequent assessment is a common theme in terms of how we can capture these feedback. And adding in these frequent assessments is something that's become easier than ever with Top Hat ACE, our AI-powered assessment. We recognize the value of frequent assessment and feedback, but also the time required for instructors to develop these questions. So ACE uses the context and material from your course to create those learning opportunities for students while cutting down on administrative time. The more opportunities to practice, the more insights are generated, and the more effective you can be with the feedback you're receiving. Let's take this a step further and think about how we can apply some of this beyond lecture time. I want to introduce to you Top Hat ACE's new personalized practice, which makes it easier than ever to meet students where they are. As students work through their assigned readings and questions, ACE will identify the specific areas they're struggling with and create targeted practice sets. Students will get the opportunity for extra practice and feedback from the precise content they're studying. And as an instructor, this is going to provide more insight on where the gaps lie well ahead of key milestones in your course, such as that first midterm. So you'll be able to see what particular areas students are having more trouble with than others. Finally, I want to bring us home with thinking a little bit more about instructor insights and what we can do with them. Kim Arnold has been teaching in the chemistry department at Indiana University as an adjunct instructor and lecturer for the past 16 years. Kim teaches various large enrollment introductory and general chemistry courses and noticed a lack of preparedness among her students. Typically, students who received a C on the first exam ended up failing the final cumulative exam in the course. By intentionally incorporating TalkPat and Active, Kim helped her students prepare for exams by clarifying those misconceptions in class and allowing students to build up their confidence outside of class with scaffolded assessment and immediate feedback. Most notably, Kim made the decision to move up one of the course's major assessments prior to the withdrawal date. So this gave students better insight into their performance overall and helped them make informed decisions about their ability to succeed in the course, but also in the core curriculum and program. Before we look at our next example, I want to ask a question. Have you had the experience where, students appear to perform well on the first major assessment or quiz, even exam, and then only to fail or struggle on the higher stakes assessment? As Kim saw, a lot of students were, not doing so well with that first midterm, and it was an indicator for success or failure later in the course. So I want to ask you, is this experience familiar, where students seem to be grasping concepts in class, but aren't doing so well on that final exam? Perfect. And we'll go ahead and open that poll, but feel free to place your response in the chat as well. And I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Perfect. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and just leverage the chat for this question. And feel free to keep the responses coming, but I think there's a pretty strong
yeah. I'm not seeing a lot of no's or not sure's, that's for sure. And we have an absolutely.
Absolutely. There we go. I think that's our answer. So let's take a look at our next slide here. All right, so I think we had a pretty strong consensus on yes, this is a pretty relatable experience, and it was for Dr. Elizabeth Sargent at the University of Delaware as well. Dr. Sargent has an interesting story. In a nutshell, she was mystified, much like many of us today, that students were doing so well on homework and assignments, but performing poorly on midterms and final exams, a problem that's common to many of us. And she figured that if students have a strong foundation from doing homework and attending class, then they should be able to demonstrate the higher level of thinking on exams. but that wasn't happening. So what she did was used Bloom's taxonomy, a framework I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to analyze her homework and midterms. And what she found was very helpful in creating a targeted plan to improve student exam performance. So as we can see on the next slide, a lot of her homework and in-class activities tended to focus more on the lower rungs of the taxonomy, where exams skewed more towards the higher order apply and analyze questions. These insights helped her revamp her course in a way that was better to allow her to scaffold learning so that students were more successful, but more importantly, more exposed to higher order thinking earlier on. And how she did this was using the Top Hat gradebook to get a view of the entire course and each student's performance, attendance, participation, and test and assignment results. Everything was captured by our learning analytics software and is available at a class and student level. We can drill down even further using our weekly course report, which is generated based on a set of criteria and sent directly to your inbox to provide high-level insights on students' performance and trends in active learning. It breaks it down at the class level so you can see the questions that were the best performing. It also drills down to the individual student level. So if you're seeing the same names appear in your inbox week after week, you recognize that those students perhaps would benefit from some earlier intervention. So the idea is to take the insights available to you and leverage them to be more effective with the opportunities you create. From our responses to the polls earlier in the conversation and our opening statement, I can see that you all care and are applying so many of these strategies. But hopefully this equips you with more tools to be even more impactful with the feedback you receive. And as we near the end of our session today, I want to leave you with this powerful insight from Dr. Sandra McGuire. She beautifully articulates the fundamental difference between studying and learning. Studying is often about grasping the what's. What are the facts? What are the formulas? What is the information that we need to absorb? And while that's a crucial first step, it's just that, a first step. However, true learning, the kind that transforms students and fuels their long-term success, goes so much deeper. It's about the hows, the whys, and the what ifs. It's about understanding how to apply knowledge, why concepts work the way they do, and what happens when we approach the problem from a different angle. This distinction is precisely where our efforts in providing effective feedback become so vital. When we offer feedback that goes beyond a grade or just a simple right or wrong, we're not just helping students study. We're empowering them to ask deeper questions, connect concepts, and dedicate themselves to lifelong learning. Our feedback, when thoughtfully delivered, is the fuel that ignites the deep understanding and propels students towards their greatest potential. Thank you, and I believe we do have a little bit of time for some Q&A, but Eric, I'll hand it over to you. You might still be on mute, Eric.
That's you can tell it's the end of the presentations today, and I'm starting to get just a little bit sloppy, Sumi. That was wonderful. But we are launching a poll now. Would love to hear feedback around this session, and we're collecting that for every session we've done. We want to make sure that we're delivering programming that is helpful and hopefully offering you all some ideas you can take back into your classrooms. And if you're interested in learning more about Top Hat, there's an extra incentive at play here. You can test drive Top Hat, respond to the poll, and you'll be entered to win a $500 gift card. We're making it really easy now to actually do that. So you create a Top Hat account, take your slide presentation, maybe a lecture that you're planning on delivering, or maybe one you've delivered in the past. You upload that. You can test out ACE, our AI-powered teaching assistant, to see if how that works, and maybe to add some knowledge checks like Sumi was describing into your presentation. You can try guest mode, which is the feature that we've been using throughout this presentation as well. So indicate your interest, and we will be following up with you in our post-event communication. So with that, let's just get to our next slide here. I think we're into Q&A here. Lot of great ideas and suggestions sort of shared in this chat. And I can definitely, I love the fact, seeing a lot of instructors, I think some comments too, about really breaking things up more and maybe moving away from a heavy emphasis on that midterm or that high stakes final exam as well. Even some indications too about some flexible grading policies too, because I think that really shifts the focus around what's the feedback. How am I actually learning? How am I actually progressing? What do I need to be doing in order to, improve the quality of my work as a student? So I think sometimes if we can kind of reduce the focus on the grade aspect, and was the work done? Did it kind of, meet a certain bar, sort of yes or no? I think that can be a really powerful way to put the focus on the learning rather than, just thinking about the grade as well. So with our Q&A here, you've seen, actually the question is, have you seen examples where student feedback led to, unexpected or even major shifts in how a course was taught or structured? I know you've worked with many faculty over the years, Sumi, so curious to see if you have a story or something that you could share there.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to throw it back actually to an example that we heard a little bit about earlier today, but I want to reference Professor Joel Stake at Louisiana Tech University and the example Brad shared around how he teaches creation and evolution. So students often come into Joel's course with a particular, kind of assumption about what those things mean. And a quick poll or a quick click on target question was instrumental in kind of breaking down some of those misconceptions and opening the door to the conversation. So this is an excellent opportunity of how that quick insight allowed the instructor to pivot the conversation. Another phenomenal example I want to refer to is from one of our earlier virtual engaged speakers, Dr. Michelle Keju. If you joined, you might remember the example of rating your grandparents. Michelle has a fantastic way of introducing a core concept in evolutionary biology and psychology by asking a really simple poll around who's your favorite grandparent. It's something that students perhaps aren't really anticipating as it relates to the lecture material. But a quick look at what folks think sets a strong foundation for the core learning objectives of the course. And often the results are more surprising than you would like. So these are both excellent educator examples and some of the very few educators I've worked with that use real-time insights to steer the discussion in class and be really agile with their approach.
That's great. I would refer back to, I think Kim Arnold's example is especially powerful, really, because not only moving up a significant assessment prior to the withdrawal date, but I think it was basically adding an assessment in a way, so giving them slightly less weight and giving them more opportunities to actually learn. And I think that sends a powerful message to students that you may have struggled with this, but you actually have time to make up that getting off kilter and actually getting yourself back on track, because you actually have more opportunity. There's more assessments coming, which I think is seems like a relatively simple sort of structural change with significant improvements. And she's actually, I'm not sure if you shared that or not, but she has seen significant improvements in the DFW rates in her course, and it's introductory chemistry, which is typically a very challenging course for students. So very encouraged too, just by all the activity in the chat and certainly in some of the polls where we see so many instructors really making use of frequent assessments as part of their teaching practice. I know in my day, it was sort of like a midterm and a final and maybe a couple of major essays, and that was kind of it. So that everything felt really high stakes. So what would you say to someone who's just getting started? Maybe they haven't done as much of this as some of the other folks attending this call today. Is there something you would recommend trying to begin with to build better feedback loops sort of in their course?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent question, Eric. My number one piece of advice to someone getting started is to kind of pick the thing that's the most important to solve. What's the challenge that is kind of dominating in your course? What is the one pain point you are looking to resolve? And working backwards to kind of implement a strategy that's going to help you address that. We've seen so many wonderful active learning strategies in various applications, but it doesn't need to be all or nothing. Even even just incorporating 1 or 2 knowledge checks a lecture or starting by incorporating discussions is going to be significantly more impactful than not doing so. So my number one piece of advice for those who are just getting started is to perhaps pick the strategy that resonates the most with you or that you're the most curious about and start from there. And you have the opportunity to continue to iterate and build as you continue to receive those insights.
That's great. Good advice, Sumi. You touched on back channels, and we did talk about that certainly in our previous presentation. And I think, there's definitely some concern there around that risks becoming, hopefully it's a source of sort of insight and feedback that you can use to, make sure that you're responsive to your students, but it's also risks being another point of distraction for students. So like, how do you think about making that work so that we sort of avoid the latter as much as possible?
Absolutely. I'd like to draw from the work of Dr. Todd Zakrzajsek. And I think, if I were to really summarize what he's saying, it's that, technology definitely, it has the potential to serve as a distraction. But if you eliminate all technology from the classroom, students are distracted anyways. They're probably thinking about what to wear tonight or where they're going for dinner. And there's so many other things that are on their mind that it's easy for their mind to wander. But I want to throw it back to something that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. I think a great way to mitigate the technology as a source of distraction is to create accountability in terms of how students utilize the back channel. So a great way to do that is by assigning a different student to monitor and report back every single class, observe trends, and encourage discussion from one another. And I think something that's even more impactful, and this doesn't have to happen real time when an instructor is teaching, but the power of just knowing your instructor is there and listening and looking at these responses, even just a quick like or comment after the fact, so students know that you are there and you want to engage with them, makes a world of a difference, and convert something that hopefully you can potentially serve as a distraction into a forum for students to become actively involved in the process of their learning.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sumi. And I love the response you got off the top. So many people actually recognize you. So not only are you a star here at Top Hat, but certainly with many of the faculty that you've helped over the years. So thank you so much. As promised on the screen here, we've got the URL you can see and another QR code. If you're interested in trying Top Hat out, you can do that with some instructions. Create your account, get questions from ACE, or AI Powered Assistant, present in guest mode. Give it a whirl, and like I mentioned, that draw is certainly in play if you're interested in participating in that. With that, it has been an absolute thrill to be with all of you this afternoon. I love the engagement we've seen, not only with the Top Hat questions, but certainly all the sharing in the chat. And we certainly hope that we've given you hopefully a few ideas to inspire your teaching this fall. And of course, summer is not over yet, so I do hope you'll enjoy some time off to refresh and recharge, which is just so important given all that you have to contend with as educators. So on behalf of everyone here at Top Hat, thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your summer.